My father is Lieutenant Colonel Kenneth Stonebraker. He was born on December 25th, 1938. At the age of 20, he joined the Air Force and spent 10 years of his military career doing technical reconnaissance. In June of 1968, we had been stationed at Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina. Dad was deployed to Udorn Airfield in Thailand and attached to the 11th Technical Reconnaissance Squadron at Udorn Airfield. At that point, he had served for 10 years. And during that last part, he had switched to flying the RF-4C. So he was the navigator on the RF-4C in Thailand.
And do you know much about how he ended up choosing the military as a career? Did he come from a family of military men?
He did not come from a family of military. My father is the only one that served in the military. He grew up on a farm. And I'll be honest, I never really got the answer as to what made that military become part of his life.
Yeah. Sometimes some guys like your dad are just they're drawn to the military because of their interest in aviation.
And he loved flying. So that was, that could have been that draw.
It might have been it. What do you know about the farm? Where was the farm that he grew up on?
Grew up in northern Indiana, in Hobart and Highland, Indiana. And I was blessed to be able to spend most of my summers there with my grandparents at the farm where my dad had grown up.
Did your mom also grow up there?
My mother grew up in Iowa.
How'd they meet?
But they met at one point. My mom's family had moved to Indiana, and they met in Indiana.
I see. So, where in this? At what point in your father's military timeline did you come along?
About halfway through. I had just turned 5 when Dad went missing. So about halfway through his military career I was born in Ohio outside of Rickenbach Air Force Base and lived there for a little while. And then we were stationed in Mississippi, at Biloxi, Mississippi, and then on to South Carolina. So I was around for about half of his 10-year military career.
And when your father was in Thailand, was it just you and your mother at home, or were there siblings?
No, I have a younger brother, and he was 11 months old when Dad headed overseas.
And how long was your father in Thailand before he went missing?
He got to Thailand in the end of May of 1968 and went missing the end of October of 1968.
So 6 months later. Yeah. So I'm sorry, you said you were 5 and your brother was younger than that.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have any memories of how and when your mother got the news?
I actually do remember quite a bit of that, which is funny at that age to remember that. I remember that living on a military base at that time. We were at Shaw Air Force Base. Even at a small age, we knew what that little blue car meant. And I can still vividly see the little blue car with the yellow words on it that said U.S. Air Force. And as kids being out in the yard playing, if one of those cars went down the road, we knew what it meant. And we were actually outside playing when that car pulled into our driveway. And I vividly remember the men that came to the door. One was a very tall man and was an older man, and the other was a little shorter, younger man. And the older man did all the talking, and the younger man just had his head down, kind of looking at his feet. And I was looking up, so I was looking in his eyes. But that's what I remember. I
Was
don't
this on
remember
your,
the words. I just
was
remember the vision
was this in your house or on the front porch?
on the front porch.
Yeah. And so your mom's standing inside.
Yes.
What do you remember after that? What happened next?
At that point, I'll be honest, I don't remember a whole lot. My mom did everything she could to protect my brother and I. And all my years growing up, my mom did that. She worked very hard to protect us and to give us the most normal life that she could. And part of that was once we left, once we were told we needed to leave military housing, we moved to a small little town in Northern California. And we were about as far away from the military as you could get. And none of the kids I went to school with had dads that were away, and we just never talked about it. So growing up in that area, this was something that we never talked about at all. We didn't talk about it at home, and we certainly didn't talk about it in public. So I grew up feeling all alone, like nobody understood, and that my dad had been forgotten. Except for my summers, when we would go to Indiana and spend part of the summer at my grandparents' farm. And there it was the opposite. It was like it had just happened. And that's all they wanted to talk about. But as a little kid, I felt really torn because if I asked the questions that I wanted to ask, I felt like I was going against my mom. Because at my mom's house, we didn't talk about it. And at grandma's house, we did. And it was a hard line to follow as a little kid. I wish now I would have asked more questions because now it's too late. I don't have a lot of the answers that I would have had if my grandparents were still alive.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's kind of hard to reconcile I mean, it seems like paradoxical that the reason they want to talk about it so much is the same reason she doesn't want to talk about it so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what do you know? What have you learned about the circumstances of your father's last known flight?
I know a whole lot more than I did, but not enough. For 45 years, I did nothing and I had no information. I knew very, very little about my dad. 45 years ago, I kind of started on a crazy little journey that brought me to actually where I am talking to you today.
I'm sorry, it's
And it
45
was,
years 45 years ago you started the journey?
no, for 45 years, I knew nothing. About 8 years ago, I started on this crazy journey.
Mhm.
And it wasn't something that I had planned to do because, as far as I knew, this was something that you didn't talk about. And I had the opportunity to stopping at a rest stop, and there were 7 Rolling Thunder members hoisting the POWMI flag. And I sat and watched them. And when they got done, for the very first time, I walked up and I said, "My dad's still missing in Vietnam." And that day forever changed my life. Because of that day, you know, they told me that my dad hadn't been forgotten and that I wasn't all alone. And that day led me to an event in Americus, Georgia, with an invite from them that connected me with other MIA kids. And that meeting led me to DC to get to see the Vietnam Memorial Wall for the very first time and attend a National League of POW MIA families yearly update, where I got to sit across the table from the government officials that were still actively working on my dad's case. And at that point, I didn't know any of that was going on. I didn't know anybody was still working on this issue. So it was because of that meeting in DC that I was able to get my dad's records and found out that he was eligible for a memorial marker at Arlington. And so that's kind of how that all got started, from knowing nothing then to having all of this information.
Yeah, and in addition to all the information, all the connections, you mentioned that you never talked about it growing up. You didn't talk about it at home. You certainly didn't talk about it in public. How important was it for you to connect with other people who had similar stories?
I'll be honest, I can't even adequately describe in words what that has meant. When I got to Americus, Georgia, and at the event called The Ride Home, and I got to sit, I remember sitting in the lobby of the hotel with 7 other MIA kids. And it was the first time in my life I had ever been around anybody like me.
And how old were
And
you?
as oh, 50 or 48
48. And this is the first time you've been around anybody who had a similar
like me.
experience. Wow.
And we sat in that lobby, none of us slept. We'd go to the events during the day and we would sit in that lobby until 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And we would share stories. And I had very little to share because I didn't know anything. But I got to hear about their growing ups and what it was like to, be in a high school play and not have your daddy there and not be able to explain to somebody why he's not there or where he's at. And just knowing that you were in a room full of people that understood all the different feelings that you feel is beyond words to me.
Hmm. Um, and so this led you eventually down I mean, you're very involved with the league. You're very involved with this issue. You've emerged as, a very well-known spokesperson on this issue. Um, I'm assuming that you didn't anticipate any of that when you started on this journey 8 years ago.
Oh, absolutely not. I didn't even know about the league. I didn't even know about this issue. Um, and definitely didn't think I would ever be speaking publicly about this issue. I was a little bit of afraid to do any public speaking, but having the opportunity and the platform to help educate about this issue and help bring awareness for the 1,584 that are still unaccounted for from Vietnam, I'm blessed to have that ability.
Mhm. You talked a little bit about the ongoing efforts. I don't know whether they're still going on, but you were able to meet with people who were actively looking for your father. Can you talk a little bit about those efforts and how they're in terms of the 1,500, almost 1,600 who are still missing? Um, what do people need to know about the efforts, the continuing efforts to find those men?
Um, like I said, growing up, I had no idea that anything was being done. In 2018, I had the privilege to get to participate in a official delegation trip to Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Thailand with the National League of POW MIA families. And during that time, we met with the government officials for continued and expanded support, the turning over of archival documents, and access to live witnesses to help bring home our unreturned veterans. Part of my time there, I had the ability to spend 5 days on an excavation site with DPAA in Laos. And
And sorry, who is DPAA?
the Defense POW MIA accounting agency is part of our Department of Defense. And that is the agency that is running this ongoing investigations, excavations, and identifications.
So you were able to
But
spend some time on one of their excavation sites?
I did. I was able to spend time up on top of a mountain in Laos at an excavation site where we were excavating an F4. And for the prior 2 or 3 years, I'd had the ability to watch all the slideshows and hear all the briefings about the efforts that were going on around the world, and especially Southeast Asia, to get our unreturned veterans home from Vietnam. While I was up on top of that mountain, I wasn't really prepared for what I was going to witness, because when I got up there, there were 2 complete Lao villages that were working hand in hand with our American team there. And they would take one shovel of dirt, and it would go in a bucket, and it would get passed around by the villagers till it got in the screening area. And they would screen that bucket, and anything that was in the screen that was bigger than the end of your fingernail got documented and sent to the lab. And I got to see the passion and dedication on the faces of those that were working this issue. And it was hot. And there was a lot of other places that they could be working, but this is where they're dedicating their time, is to helping bring closure to us families. And the slideshows showed it, but you can't feel it till you get to see that look in their eyes of how dedicated they are to this mission.
I wonder if this isn't, forgive me if this is too personal, but you mentioned the word closure. I know people have strong feelings about that word. I talk to people who say this wasn't closure for me. If anything, it opened up a new part of my life. But in a more sort of mechanical sense, I mean, your father hasn't been found, and I just wonder,
Correct.
you know, what that must be like for you to be standing on top of a mountain in Laos and watch a family go through that revelation that you haven't had yet.
I didn't get closure on that mountain. And there's a very strong chance that my father's remains will not be found. The soil in Southeast Asia is so acidic that I had the opportunity to visit several other sites that had been closed, that they found personal items, but found no physical remains, because the soil's literally eating the bone away. So there is a very large chance that we may never really know, or may never be able to get my dad's remains on US soil. But having been there and having seen the thousands of hours that are going through archival documents, walking through the jungles of Southeast Asia and interviewing witnesses to try to find crash sites, and the dedication of the guys that are on the ground, I will know that it wasn't because they didn't try.
Yeah, that sounds important. The effort sounds important to you.
The effort's very important. And we need to be, we can't let this effort end.
Um, one of my favorite stories of yours that I have run across in preparing for this interview is the story of the tapes that you found in the attic. Do you mind talking about that a little bit?
Shortly after my first trip to DC, I was in my mother's attic helping her get some stuff down, and I found a box. And in that box were the reel to reel tapes that my mom and dad had sent back and forth. I vaguely remember those tapes, but I get them out of the attic, and of course, we have nothing to play them on. They're the reel to reel tapes, and we don't have a reel to reel player. And I was able to find a man in Nashville that said he could put them on CD for me. So I sent them down there. And a couple days later, he calls and he, he told me, he said, Cindy, you are going to cause me to have a divorce. And I told him, I said, but I have never even met you. And he said, well, of all the jobs I've ever done, this is the most rewarding. And when 5 o'clock comes, I can't just shut it off and go home. I want to stay. These tapes had been in my mom's attic for 45 years, and they were literally disintegrating as they were going through the machine. So he was going inch by inch to get the voices off of these tapes. So the next night he calls, it's about 11 o'clock, and he asked me if I was in the music industry. And I laughed and I said, no, why would you ask? And he said, every time my mom put me on the floor with the tape recorder, I was singing or playing my xylophone. And I remember that. I remember my mom sitting us on the floor with the big tape recorder there and handing me the microphone, and I would sing songs to my dad. And then when we would get one back, we would play it and he would talk about, the previous tape. So the following night, he calls and he asks when my birthday is. Well, my birthday's October 18th, and Dad went missing on October 28th. And so this was the first part of October. And he said, you will have your box before your birthday, but you are not allowed to listen to it till your birthday or open it. So a couple days later, this box comes in the mail, and I really, really fought with whether or not I should open it. Figured he would never really know if I did, but I decided to wait. And in the morning of my birthday, I came downstairs and I opened up the box, and there was a CD on it on the top that said, listen to first. And when I put it in, it was my dad. And that was the first time in 45 years I had heard my dad's voice. And the first couple minutes of it, he's talking to my mom, and I can't really explain all of the feelings that I had hearing my dad's voice for the first time in all those years. There were parts of it that sounded very familiar, but I have spent a lot of my years growing up in the South, and my dad was from Northern Indiana, and he does not have a Southern accent. So it sounded kind of funny from what I'm used to hearing. But there was also this familiarity with it. I mean, when I could hear him. It sounded familiar. There were a lot of tears. There were a lot of tears hearing that voice. But about 2 minutes into it, the conversation switched to me. And my dad recorded about 6 minutes of him just talking to me about my coloring, about my birthday party at school, about how proud he was of me, for me to always do my best, and that he loved me. And I can't tell you how many times growing up I needed to have heard those words. I needed to have heard that my dad was proud of me and that he loved me and for me to always do my best. Um, I have that tape saved in about 12 different locations, and I listen to it a lot. That's that encouragement from my daddy, um, letting me know everything's going to be okay. But also growing up as a little girl, and I look back at it now and I wonder, I mean, it doesn't make sense now, but as a little girl, I always wondered what it was that I did to make my dad not come home. And when I hear this tape, you can definitely tell the difference in his voice. And what you hear on that tape is not an officer in the Air Force that had been shot at the night before, that spent all day redoing the flight plan to go on the same mission that night. You hear a daddy talking to his little girl. And it was able to kind of stop my thinking of feeling like he abandoned me. Um, for him to take that time on that day with everything else going on to sit and have a conversation with me lets me know that it wasn't anything that I did that made him not come home. At the end of that tape, the tape was about 40 minutes long. At the end of that tape, he does talk about how he needed to hurry up and finish that tape because he had to be at the squadron at 2. And he literally mailed that tape on the way to the mission he didn't come home from. And out of the 6 tapes that were in the box, that was the only tape that actually had Dad's voice on it. And the only reason we had that was because he mailed it on the way to the mission he didn't come home from, because my mom would get the tapes, we'd listen to it, turn it over, and record over it to send back to him. So that is the only reason that we actually do have that tape. And in my conversations with all of the other MIA kids that I've had the opportunity to meet, I feel so very blessed to have that. I only have 4 photos of my dad. That's all I have. And a lot of them have all these photos and they have videos and all of that, but they don't have their voice. I have my dad's voice. And I have the ability with technology now to carry it with me everywhere I go.
Isn't that something? Cindy, as you've gone on this journey over the last 8 years and your picture of your father has become more and more complete, are there things about yourself that make more sense to you now?
Um, yes. Growing up, there were times that I wonder if I was adopted. It seemed like my mom and my brother had a completely different sense of humor than I had. And I often wondered why. Well, getting the opportunity to hear Dad's voice, and inside that box were also a couple letters. So I've had the opportunity to read through some of those letters. And in so doing, I have found that the reason I have the sense of humor I have is because I got it from my dad. Some of the jokes that he told on the tape, I thought were hilarious, and the rest of my family kind of rolled their eyes. So also when I was able to get his military records, all of his yearly reviews were in that file. And I had the opportunity to read through some of that. And there were several times where there were words used in my dad's yearly reviews that I've actually had written in some of my work reviews. So piece by piece, I'm figuring out that I have a lot more of my dad in me than I had originally thought,
Yeah.
which
How about that?
I think it's a compliment.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, that's, listen, daddy's little girl is a great thing to be. And I say that as a father of two daughters. Um, what do you have examples of, the kinds of words you're talking about?
Um, integrity was one of the words that came up. Um, and so that's when I
Mm.
off the top of my head, I can remember
Well,
that
that's a,
kind of caught me.
yeah, that's a good word. Thank goodness. Thank goodness it was integrity and not, one of your lesser virtues. Uh,
I'll
whatever
take
those
it.
are. Right, right. Stubborn as hell. Um,
Hard
uh,
worker was another one.
oh, is that right?
Dedicated and dedicated.
And dedicated. All right. Um, so speaking of dedicated, I want to ask you about your involvement with, the league and other organizations and just the broader community of POW MIA families. Um, I guess before I do that, um, yeah, you had mentioned that your sources for helping to complete the picture of your father were the tapes and the letters and the performance reviews and the documents. If I'm not mistaken, you also have spoken with people who served with your dad.
I did. I had a rare opportunity, and it was one that kind of came up because of a trip with some other MIA kids. A group of us had met in Dayton, Ohio, to go to the Air Force Museum. And while we were there, we ran across a group of Vietnam veterans who were, for lack of another word, on a field trip. And as we were talking to them, one of the gentlemen kept kind of singling me out. And as we were leaving that group, he looks at me and he says, "You need to go to Fort Walton Beach, Florida next weekend. There is a technical reconnaissance reunion, and that's a small specialty group, and there may be somebody down there that knew your dad." Well, I wasn't up to driving to Florida, so I made up a flyer and I sent it down, and they had it at the registration table for that reunion. And on Tuesday night, they called and said, "There is a gentleman here that knew your dad." And I had waited 45 years to hear or to meet somebody that knew him. So I basically gave them my phone number and I said, after the meeting, have him give me a call. I would love to talk to him. Well, the next night they called and said there were three. So I'm like, I cannot not go down there. So I got up at 2 o'clock in the morning on Thursday morning and I drove to Fort Walton Beach, Florida, where I got to sit around the table with three men that served with my dad. And these were men that served with him at the time of the incident. So there were two men in my father's plane. One was William Stroven, who was the pilot, and my dad, who was the navigator. And one of the gentlemen I got to meet was the roommate of William Stroven. And he was actually a navigator. So he did the same kind of job my dad did. So they spent a lot of time together. So for 8 hours, we sat and we laughed and we cried and they told stories. And looking back on it now and having talked to them recently again, I'm not sure who got the most healing out of that conversation. But it was an amazing time to get to speak with them. And I had thousands of questions, but I didn't just want to know about the plane and about the food and about what they were doing there. I wanted to know the stupid things. I wanted to know my dad's favorite color. Was he good at math? What was his first car? What kind of music did he like? And these guys didn't know all the answers, but they knew some of them because they had become like family. And I didn't get all the answers, but I learned a lot about my dad's character. I heard stories about how when my dad wasn't working, they could always find him helping whoever needed help. If someone was getting ready for an inspection or someone was studying to take a board exam or something, my dad was helping them. So one of the men I got to meet later on during that reunion was a man who never even met my dad. He actually was my dad's replacement. And he said he felt like he knew him. He felt like he had met him. He came in 2 or 3 days after my dad went missing. But he said everybody spoke so highly of him. He said the motto of the unit was, I want to be like Stony. That's what they called my dad. So having that opportunity to sit and share and hear the stories was amazing.
What were the of all the revelations for you that night? What was the biggest surprise?
Um, I guess one of the biggest surprises to me, we were heading into a banquet. And as we were walking through the door, one of the gentlemen leaned over to me and he asked me how I liked my dollhouse. And I looked up and I asked him, I said, how do you know about my dollhouse? Because my birthday was 10 days before Dad went missing. And my dad had sent me a dollhouse from Thailand for my birthday. So I asked him, I said, how do you know about that? And he looked down and he says, well, I was with your dad when he got it. And your dad was very particular about which one you got. So we go into the banquet and I'm on the completely other side of the room. And the more I'm sitting there, the more it's bothering me because I can't remember what I got for my birthday last year. How in the world would he remember what I got 45 years ago? So I got up and walked across the room and I asked him, I said, how would you remember that? And he stood up and he gave me a hug. And he said, Cindy, that's not what we were doing over there. That was the one and only time that I went dollhouse shopping. He said it was the one moment of normalcy in a world of chaos. And up until that point, I had only thought that my dad's loss had only affected my family. And it hadn't. It had affected all those who had ever served with him. And especially the guys who had spent 6 months living with him. And this gentleman actually turned out to be the man who flew the mission the next night because my dad didn't come home with the tapes. So someone had to go complete the mission. And this gentleman was the man that did that.
Now, they only knew him in one sense, right? They knew him at his job, which is only one facet of your father, I'm sure. But it's an important one, right? And there are moments at work where you get to understand somebody's hot buttons or their sense of humor or, or their intellect or their, things about their character. And so as they're revealing all this to you, because you said you never talked about it. You never talked about it growing up. I just wonder how much of, were there any moments where, that stand out for you where suddenly you just recognized yourself in a way that you hadn't before?
All the time, but I can't even explain how. You know, I left Florida and I had a 12-hour drive to get home by myself, knowing I had no one that I could call to talk about what just happened. I would not be who I am now if it had not been for this journey. And I can't even explain that. I have no words to explain it.
Well, the journey has led you to a community of families who are affected by the, I mean, just by the issue of, and you've become very, very actively involved. You want to talk a little bit about your involvement?
Absolutely. 2015, I was elected to sit on the board of directors for the National League of POW MIA Families. I served on that board for 5 years. I have now come off of that board and serve as the Kentucky State Coordinator for the League of Families. So I help coordinate events and issues and families in the state of Kentucky. That being part of the League of Families has been instrumental in this whole journey, in the ability to connect with other families and the importance of being able to be and spend time around other people like you. It's also given the families the ability to meet with the government officials on a yearly basis to get personal updates on their individual cases and to keep this POW MIA issue on the forefront. The updates of the annual league meetings provide you with updates from government officials on what is going on with this issue. And without the ability to do that, I mean, that's where we get a lot of our information. And then the time that you get to spend with families and hear their stories and kind of follow their cases, and we all feed off of each other. It's a very important connection, is to have a resource for families in one place. My job now is I work with the Woody Williams Foundation. And Woody Williams is the last living Medal of Honor recipient from World War II. And the Woody Williams Foundation helps to build Gold Star Family Memorial monuments to honor families who have lost a loved one in military service. At this point, we have 88 monuments that have been dedicated across the United States, with another 74 that are in process. And these monuments serve and honor Gold Star families. The mission of the foundation is to honor, recognize, and serve Gold Star families and the legacy of their loved ones who have paid the ultimate sacrifice. But what happens when one of these monuments goes into a community? It brings together the families in that community that may not know the other families like them. It serves as a reminder to the families that their loved ones are not forgotten, and they serve as an educational tool for the communities about the sacrifices that have been made. But what we have found as we have traveled across the country dedicating these monuments is what an amazing job they are doing of helping connect families and communities, especially the Vietnam families. Because during that era, there wasn't a lot. There wasn't a lot of support for families of the Vietnam era, and a lot of them feel very disconnected. And I can't tell you what it is like to stand there at a dedication and see two Vietnam families who live in the same community, who did not know each other, to be able to connect. And At two of our dedications that I can vividly remember, we were able to connect MIA children, MIA kids, to other MIA kids. And to get to see and hear the stories about two adult children whose fathers are still missing in Vietnam, who lived within a mile of each other and did not know each other. And to be able to have the access to travel around the country and meet these people and help connect them with the resources that are out there that they may not know are out there. And the other thing that we have seen has been amazing is to watch the connection between the Vietnam Gold Star families and the newer families. And they are becoming, the Vietnam families are becoming mentors to the new families. So these monuments are a place of permanence in a community where these families can gather and connect with each other and heal and reflect. And it is changing the environment in the communities that these monuments are going in. And it's such an honor to get to do that. And part of my goal now is to connect these families and make sure that there's never another family that feels all alone, like nobody cares, like I did growing up.
Wow. Just remembering something that you said early in the interview, that you used to be afraid of public speaking.
Yes, I flunked a college history class because I wouldn't give an oral book report in front of 15 people that I knew.
Mhm. Look at you now. You're really wonderful at this, Cindy. Um, is there anything that you would like to add? Anything that you feel like we didn't get to, or that I failed to ask? Anything you want to take a second run at?
Um, I think that as we are approaching POW MIA Recognition Day, that this is the perfect time for our nation to recommit to the fullest possible accounting for those that are still missing in action and or otherwise unaccounted for. What we're seeing at the regional meetings for DPAA, for their regional update meetings, is you are seeing further generations, aunts and uncles and cousins of World War II people. You know, this is a generational thing. So we need to recommit to that fullest possible accounting. When it comes to Southeast Asia, we're going into that next generation. More and more of the parents are no longer there. So now it's the children that are waiting. It's the children that are taking charge of the movement of it. But we're getting older as well. So unless that mission gets passed down to our kids, the legacy of our loved ones could be forgotten if no one is willing to keep it going.
If people want to get involved, what do you recommend as a first step?
Um, the National League of POW MIA Families, for those that are still missing, or to make a donation. DPAA for dpaa.gov for the most updated statistics of the mission. and the woodywilliams.org. We have a community calendar page that not only will show you where we are going dedication wise, but other outreach events that we do to help bring Gold Star families together.
Perfect. And perfect timing. You're a pro, Cindy. You really are. And it was
Well,
great
it's really
fun.
funny.
I love talking to you yesterday, but I have to say I really have enjoyed this today.
Well,
Seeing
thank
you and
you.
hearing you.
I have as well. You made it not as not as stressful as I thought it would be. You know, I was thinking last night of the honor it is to actually get to do this with you. And what a, I hate to say it this way, but what a big deal this is. And of all the families out there, for me to be one of the ones chosen to share the story is very humbling. And then I started kind of laughing in that when I started on this journey, I was a chicken farmer. My job was to collect 40,000 eggs every day. And now I've been to Vietnam. And last week, I was on a private jet with Woody Williams, 97-year-old last living Medal of Honor recipient from World War II. And I flew from Pocatello, Idaho to Elkin, North Carolina with him. And that is a long way from a chicken farm.